Hi, this is Gabriela Vega again today on Winning Wednesday, wanting to welcome my fabulous friend, Lisa Ward.
You're so
Lisa,
kind.
welcome. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Oh, it's always fun to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I'm really excited about is sharing with everyone your expertise. And this is a really great time for it because the end of the year is always a time when people like to reflect on what they've accomplished during the year, maybe set some goals for the coming year. And so, of course, if we do that on a personal basis, I'm assuming you're going to be here to talk to us about why business owners should likely be doing the same thing. Right?
Oh, absolutely. This is the best time.
Well, and I am so excited to share what you have to tell, Lisa, because you have represented companies and entrepreneurs for nearly 25 years. You are amazing, intelligent, and so I would like to know, first question, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs as we approach the year end? What should they be doing?
Right. Well, now that you've established I'm ancient, which is true, long in the tooth.
Not true. She was like 3.
Lots of stories to tell. I think probably the first thing, let's just start really basic. You've formed a business opportunity this year. Things are going well. Maybe now's the time to think, am I structured properly? Have I just been doing it, what we call as a sole proprietorship, myself in my name, doing business as perhaps, the name of the business? Is it time to give yourself some legal protection? And when we look at that, we look at, is the appropriate mechanism an S Corp, which is a small business corp, a C Corp? Is it an LLC? Is it a partnership? So Absolutely. Good reasons to do a variety of those things. One thing we need to understand is they're taxed differently. If you do an LLC, you can do that with just one member, more than one member, or a partnership. Or an S Corp, then that's a flow-through taxation basis. So it ends up flowing through on your personal tax return. A C Corp is different. It's taxed at the corporate level. And for years and years, we've heard, C Corp, high taxation, double taxation. Right?
I remember listening to our business law professors telling us that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that advice is generally still true, but it's worth visiting with your accountant about at this juncture. And that is because the tax rates have changed in the last few years.
Okay,
so I'm going to give you an example that might be interesting to you. Right now, if you're married filing jointly, that's a very typical scenario, and you make up to $80,000, you're taxed at a 12% rate. So a flow through for a partnership or an LLC, that would be the way to do it. But if you're in a tax bracket where you're making $320,000 to $415,000 a year.
Here's to hoping.
Yep. Then you're going to be taxed at a 32% tax bracket, where your C Corp is at a 21%.
Oh, okay.
So if you're building your company, you're not taking lots of distributions, and we don't want that whole value to flow through to your personal return, we might think about that. We also might think about not filing jointly. We also might think about you and your spouse each being owners, so that you have at least the Social Security savings on each. So different choices that really require you to do a little planning with your accountant, and then probably visit your attorney to make those adjustments at the state level.
Okay. Now, with most of these businesses, you had talked about partnerships, LLCs, S Corps. Are there different types of identification numbers with these companies, or is it just a matter of I will use my Social Security number for this company to pay for the taxes on this company?
Right, so that's your choice too, because if you are doing business, you've formed an LLC, you're the single owner of that LLC, you could use it as a disregarded entity and use your own Social Security number.
Okay.
But you also might want to protect that Social Security number. You might prefer that that's not what your employees get, that that's not what your vendors get, that it's not circulating as widely, because you just get one social security number.
Right.
So there's reasons why a business would choose to have its own taxpayer ID number. Now, of course, if it's a corporation, it will have its own taxpayer ID number. And generally, if it's an LLC or a partnership with a number of partners that aren't staying in the same home, sleeping in the same bed, it will also have its own taxpayer ID number. Okay. But that's something you do have to file for, something you have to protect, and either your accountant or attorney will help you do that.
Okay. Well, with respect to taxes, because I always think, I for one have never been great with taxes. It's overwhelming for me.
Admissions, confession time.
But what other things should we be thinking about for state and federal tax filings at this point?
Yeah, right. That's a really good question. Your licenses, what you're doing, does it require a license? Are you maybe creating a product that requires a health license? Could it be that you require a liquor license, a tobacco license? Could you, what you're doing, requiring a security license? I mean, there are licenses that are required. Do you have your unemployment filing correct? Maybe you started out and you were the only person working in the business, and now you've hired someone. Now we're talking about unemployment and workers' compensation insurance, unless there's a reason that you would be exempt from that workers' compensation insurance, and you would visit with your attorney about those exemptions. Farm laborers, for instance, can be exempt.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So you'd also want to look at your sales tax permit. Are you in a business that you really need to be collecting sales tax? And some online businesses struggle to know where they land, but that's becoming very, very clear that you need to err on the side of collecting the sales tax. Absolutely. So that's case law that we want to keep looking at, because that continues to evolve. The other thing that we need to talk about is, are you formed in the right state? And, so many companies, for instance, used to file in Delaware. Delaware is known as the corporation state, had the best corporate law, the best LLC law. And, this year we started working with some hemp companies, some cannabis companies. Let's say you're a cannabis company. You probably shouldn't form in Delaware. Do you know why?
Delaware doesn't have legal hemp?
Right.
Oh, a score for me?
Yeah. So if your contracts say, or your corporation says, as otherwise allowed by state law
doesn't allow anything.
I'm doing something that's not allowed by state law.
Oh my goodness,
there might be a reason that someone could breach the contract, including the operating agreement for investors. So these are things we need to think about. We also need to think about, if we form in Kansas, but now we're doing business in 4 or 5 other states, should we file as a foreign corporation or foreign LLC in those states? And the reason,
does that mean?
Well, you would file with the Secretary of State saying, I'm a Kansas company, but I want to do business in Nebraska and Colorado as well. And you can do business there but you can't sue on a contract in that state unless you've filed to do business, unless your presence is known.
So your registration may be pivotal to protecting your proprietary rights.
Yes, absolutely. So very important to make sure your filings as your company grows are keeping up with what your operations are.
Oh gosh, my head is already swimming because this is a lot of stuff, and we will be navigating a lot of things. Please start sending questions. These questions are going to be answered by our fabulous Lisa Ward. So Lisa, we've looked at licenses, permits, registrations, taxes, tax filings. What are other things that we should be thinking about? What about people who decide they're going to start a small business, baking cookies, selling cookies? All of a sudden a friend joins them,
right?
But they've not done anything other than just sell cookies. What should they be thinking about doing?
Well, we should think about, is that other person an owner? Are they an employee? Are they an independent contractor? So let's pretend for a moment your thought is, well, they're an owner. They're bringing the expertise of making the second kind of cookie we're going to specialize in. They help in the business. They brought customers to us. We're going to make them an owner. Some people make the mistake of thinking you must have an operating agreement or you must have bylaws in writing that that person has signed for them to be an owner.
Right.
That's not true. There has to be some evidence of ownership. The evidence of ownership can be an offer and acceptance communication.
Conversation.
Right? Can show that you've provided the capital, whether it's knowledge, whether it's money, to do that. And then we start making decisions together, right? Orally, verbally, we are deciding this is the way the company's going to run and how we do things.
We go together to get a loan,
Right.
to make more cookies.
Right. We have a company. We have a partnership agreement, an operating agreement. It's just verbal. And what we haven't actually agreed to, state law tells us what those terms are. For instance, majority rules on most day-to-day decisions. Even though if we have 3 owners, that might not have been what we wanted. We might have wanted for all 3 of us to have to agree before we get a loan or pledge pieces of the business
But
or
because
take
we
in
didn't
someone
write
else.
it down.
Yes, yes. So very, very important to do your operating agreement or your bylaws right away. I always say, and this is even a little risky, but if you're not sleeping in the same bed with your business partner, you need to have a written agreement.
Very true.
Okay.
Probably even under those circumstances.
Yeah, even under those circumstances.
A written agreement.
Right,
Because
exactly.
you never know when those sleeping arrangements is going to end,
Oh,
folks.
that's true, but that's for another day,
That's-
right?
yep,
We have
that's
a
for
new
next
family
month.
law attorney coming that
We're
will
so excited about it.
tackle that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
we don't
ma'am.
want to do that one right before the Christmas holiday.
Not
right?
at all. Not at all.
You are absolutely right. Let's talk for just a second, if you don't mind, about what that operating agreement or bylaws would include. An operating agreement would be for an LLC, bylaws for a corporation, but they really do the same thing, partnership agreement.
They tell us what we agreed to.
They tell us what we agreed to.
Okay.
And one thing we want to make sure of is we know who makes the day-to-day decisions. What are the super duper decisions that more than a majority should do? What happens when one of us wants out? Do we just get to offer it to anybody? Do we have to offer it to the company first? The majority shareholder second, the others third? How does that work? And how do we value that ownership? And
Those are all good questions.
one mistake that I've run into more than once is an operating agreement or a buy-sell agreement that says if you want out, that we will have agreed on an annual basis what the value of our business is.
Okay.
So we're partners, we're going to agree. Then you want out, okay? But we haven't documented our agreement for several years. And maybe that boilerplate language, which is boilerplate's just standard language. You know, when I was first out of law school, I would think, why are we talking about boilers? But it's just standard language. So it might say, if we haven't agreed for a period of time, then an appraisal is required.
Okay.
Maybe that's to our advantage to have a third party.
Or not.
Or not. Because appraisals are just opinions. And it may give a very skewed look at what the business is. So there are different ways to value a business. We could decide the right formula is based on, certain book values of our company as prepared in the financial statements and the balance sheets. We might decide that an appraisal is right. We might decide that as long as we can agree we don't need an appraisal, there are different methods. Or if there's only 2 of us, we might decide if I make an offer, you can either accept it and buy me out, or I get to buy you out for the same price that I offered my shares to you. Oh. So that is one other way that we sometimes see a drop dead or I take you kind of kind of offer acceptance. But we want to put that in because the last thing we want to be doing is fighting to what we call partition the business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and let's talk about the types of things that could trigger a buy-sell agreement. How do we know those are coming up, and what do we do if we don't have any buy-sell provisions.
Right. So we go into a company with the idea that our interest is freely alienable. We can sell our interest to whomever we choose.
Okay.
So if that's not the deal we want, if you don't want to be in business with a stranger,
Right.
then we have to put more agreements in place. For instance, you might want to know what happens if I die. You know,
That's a
would
great
you
question.
want to be in business with the probate court? Would you want to require that my interest be held in trust so the company would not have to be valued in a probate estate? Would you want to say it's okay if I transfer my interest to my husband or an adult child, but you don't want to do business with anyone else?
Right.
Or, I mean, you know my husband. Maybe you want to say you don't want to do business with my husband.
I would totally do business with you, darling.
But we don't always feel that way about spouses, do we? So sometimes we've come together in our business because we have special and unique characteristics, properties that make us good at the business.
Absolutely.
And if I passed away, you might feel like, well, you're going to have to carry the load,
Right.
because my spouse isn't equipped in the same
In
way.
the same business. Right.
Or maybe you don't mind that my spouse is going to be an owner in the business, but you want to make sure that you have the votes, you
decisions.
control,
Gotcha.
etc., and that you can buy that spouse out at a certain price or at a certain formula at some time later
Right.
in time. And maybe over time, over 4 or 5 years, at a certain interest rate, those kinds of things.
And it strikes me that there would be instances where people, for example, lawyers, like we have to have a license to
Yeah.
own a business, and if
Yeah.
you don't have that license and you pass, and your spouse does not have that
Right.
license, how do they have any access or control of the mechanism? So
Right.
that makes sense.
So so for corporations, professional corporations that require a license, then it's just not even possible to transfer the interest. But that's even the more reason that you want an orderly transfer of the value of that person's business and a buyout. Maybe you won't be in a position, if you're in business with 2 other people who are killed in a common car accident, to buy both of them out at one time.
True.
So you might want the option that you could buy them out over a period of years where you could actually get a loan or find another partner to come in.
Right.
And those are the kinds of things we would want to have in that operating agreement.
Okay.
The other things, just to
Yes, I'm so sorry.
put something on, sometimes we even care about things like bankruptcy, incompetency, of course, death, divorce, judgment creditors. We don't want to end up in business with a bankruptcy court.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Things of that nature. Or if I'm going to lose my interest or half of my interest in a divorce, we want to say the half I lose must come back to the company and my spouse would only get the equivalent value.
Gotcha.
So those are things that I like to see in a buy-sell agreement.
Okay. Now, I mean, we've been talking about a lot of types of documents, licenses, agreements, contracts. Strikes me that there would be a value in certain businesses that people might not even contemplate. What about intellectual property value?
Right, absolutely. So maybe you started your business, you registered to do business under that name, but you really didn't think about it any more than that. Maybe now it's becoming recognizable and you want to protect it with a trademark. Or maybe it's a logo and at first you didn't think it was important to trademark, but now it is.
Okay.
Those are registrations that we absolutely can help you with and have great partners to work with you. Maybe it's a slogan that you want to trademark. Maybe you have works that you want to copyright.
Right.
Something that you've done artistic, something you've done in writing, maybe a guide. Those are things that we could copyright. And of course, maybe you're in manufacturing and the system you wanted to use didn't work. You modified some things. You came up with something new. You don't intend to go sell it necessarily, but you have a great idea. Maybe it's something you should patent.
Absolutely.
And maybe you sell that patent to someone else. So at the end of the year, it's just a really good time to kind of look back over the year, take stock in what intellectual property you might have. Maybe it's even some of the things that you've been doing digitally, program-wise, etc., and see if that's something you need to move forward with protecting. And while we're on that point, I think it's very important for you always to think about protecting what you can individually as an owner or in a separate company, so that if you have claims against the operation or products of your company, that intellectual property is separately owned and just licensed to the organization that's doing business and might be more subject to claims.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So if you're an inventor, owner, business owner, you might want to have your intellectual property still in a separate business that is only owned by you, as opposed to the business manager that's now your COO, because they know the business side. They shouldn't necessarily get the benefit of your intellectual
Right. Maybe it's product liability claims. Maybe your logo rocks, but for some reason there are some claims that are percolating. You own the logo separately. You could always start another company later on and license the logo to be used again in the separate company. So those are all things to just think about, consider. Also, if you were ever to sell the operating business, you might be able to keep residual income on the license of that intellectual property. Maybe you came up with a device, I don't know, a sugar mill, a mustard mill, something like that, and now you've been making them. Just because you sell the commercialization of that product doesn't mean you have to sell the license to or the patent to it.
And of course, you guys, for being able to understand the fine nuances of this, you need an attorney who is conversant, like Lisa, actually knowing what these differences are, because I wouldn't know what the differences are. So
I do think, good counsel, good banking, you do want good advisors, good accountant, you want good people around you, because if your business is really going to rock, you need to do your bailiwick, and we'll do ours, and the effort will be to support you along the way.
Not try to be the jack of all trades to your own business, right?
No, right, exactly. And just having a sounding board, just having, I'm thinking of this, because things change, One thing that we talk about are employees. Is somebody an employee, an independent contractor, and how has that changed over the years? We have to be careful. If we make an employee a salaried employee, are they earning enough to not be paid overtime?
Right.
If we don't keep track of their personal time off, are we treating one employee different than another? Could it give rise to an age claim or a sex discrimination claim or anything that we don't intend to happen, but because we're just not paying attention and keeping accurate records, it might give rise to that claim.
Absolutely. And it strikes me that the end of the year would be a good time to be doing some revisiting of employee issues, right? Things like employee handbooks. Can you talk a little bit about that? Employee handbooks. Should we even be having an employee handbook, or what are the things that we should be doing to explain to our employees what we need from them?
Right. So the key is that employee handbook is not a contract, because we have great right-to-work states here, right-to-work laws in Kansas that says we can terminate or be terminated for cause or not for cause. And we don't want to change that by contractual obligations.
Right.
So while it's good to have an employment manual to set forth what the expectations are, we want to make sure that it's for descriptive purposes and it clearly states this is not a contract.
Okay.
This is a right-to-work state. You're a right-to-work employee. If we have an employment handbook, this is the time to revisit it, because we have a lot going on in our country. We have a Me Too movement. I've been watching the show, I think it's Morning News on Apple TV.
I heard of it.
Very good. So, recently I was made aware of a great company who still has a short skirt policy in their employee handbook. And, I wanted to say, do we have a roving eyes policy in our handbook? I didn't see that. So things move, right? Like when I was coming out of law school, not to digress, but I can remember being on my career placement officers in their office.
Right.
And she was a female, and she was calling a firm in the area I was interviewing to say, would you want to interview this student too? Because she's great, we really like her, all the things you're supposed to say when you're a career placement officer, of course. And the male voice on the other side said, we've hired a woman recently and it didn't work out so well, and our wives are just not going to let us hire another woman for a while.
Oy vey.
You can't say that. You can't say that. Don't have that in your policy.
For sure.
But even things like just being aware of what ADA is now, because, we have more mental health definitions.
Absolutely.
We need to be concerned about any gender nuances.
Right.
We need to be concerned with learning disabilities and whether those are ADA items to accommodate. And are we treating people differently? Are we communicating with people differently? So it's always just good to take an approach from an outsider, because while you might not mean to make suggestive comments, while you might not mean to have those kinds of policies, having somebody from the outside look at it is really your best protection.
Absolutely.
Time off tends to be one. Concealed carry. If we're doing drug testing, do we know if we're testing for CBD or if we're testing for marijuana? Are we paying attention to what these nuances mean? And how are we handling criminal offenses, expungements, which we can help with should we need those things?
Yes, we can.
And I-9. You might speak to I-9.
Absolutely. I-9s are an important part, I agree with you, of year-end planning, because you always want to make sure that everything is how you're going to need it in the event that you are audited by IRS or Department of Homeland Security, ICE division, as a result of those things. So for sure.
And you would be capable, am I correct, in looking over a company's filings and determining if their paperwork was correct with respect to immigration? Absolutely.
We would be able to do that, as well as create audits of their entire employee handbook, or not handbook, I-9 history, or even do mini audits. One of the things that I like to offer to employers when we can is a mini audit that is just like a 5 to 10 I-9 review, and just sit down and go over with them what things should be done, what shouldn't be done, and best practices.
Perfect. So shameless commercial.
Plug.
If you're at all nervous about how you're handling employees, independent contractor relationships,
we can help.
Yep, we can help. We can help.
Well, and now let's talk a little bit more about employees. Year end, we are deciding whether or not our business is thriving, it's going well. What should we be doing to prepare for future new investors or new employees? What can we do right now at our year-end sessions?
That's really good. So with respect to employees or investors, this is a good time for you to take, because you're probably doing bonuses, distributions, maybe giving raises. This is a good time to consider whether your company should have a covenant not to compete, a covenant not to solicit, a covenant not to disclose, a covenant not to disparage. So that just means I won't talk bad, I won't give away the secrets, I won't steal the customers, I won't go to work for somebody else. And there's a couple sides to those coins. There's a philosophy of, should we really be binding people to our company? What does that say when they feel like they have to stay? Or they can't work or compete in the community they live in. And for years and years, we've seen covenant not to compete. And they're generally enforceable within 50 miles, within 2 years. We have lots of experience in our firm litigating covenant not to compete, writing them. So if you find yourself in that situation, we're happy to weigh in on that.
And writing them in a way that they're not going to be litigable.
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
I imagine that you can have them, but you can't be overbroad. Is that what
You
you're
cannot be
referring to?
overbroad. There has to be value given. So I can't just walk in and say, hey, I'd like you to sign this covenant not to compete without giving you a raise, a promotion, things of material value.
Okay.
What I'd also suggest is if that employee really doesn't want to be with you, why not put a liquidated damage clause in? It's not a penalty, but it says, I really will be damaged if you leave. I've provided training, you know my business inside and out, but if you want to go to work for somebody else, this is the amount of money that I'm entitled to replace you and the time I invested in you. And those are readily upheld. And I think they make good sense because if another business is attracted to you, they're probably find that you're worth paying that liquidated damage. Absolutely. You can go on about your way. The company that invested in you has, new value to compensate for the loss. I think it's a good win-win situation, but they have to be drafted in a way that they are enforceable, and we can help with that.
Absolutely, we can help with that. Now, what it sounds like to me, ultimately, that with every little fine nuance that you have to go through to determine whether you are in a great place for your year end, you need to hire competent, experienced legal counsel.
Well, we would definitely say that, wouldn't
yes,
we? But I do think that's true. I think in the work I do in the firm, I don't litigate generally. We have other members in our firm that do that. So my job is to keep you out of a position that you find yourself in need of a litigator. And if we do our job right, we are being counseled before it happens, like proactively. And we get everything. We get things like, I found out my secretary is sleeping with the manager. Is there a problem if I fire the secretary? Well, only if you don't fire the manager too, right? So there are things like that we get. Like there really is nothing that would shock us. I feel like at this point.
I would agree with you.
And those conversations are confidential. So if you find yourself like, I just need somebody to bounce something off the wall. I don't know that I need to do anything legally, but I'd like your 2 cents worth, your advice.
Absolutely.
I think it's usually money well spent.
I would agree. And I think that if I were to start a new business, you would definitely be the attorney that I would want, because I love the idea of preparing documents with the idea of making it so good that you don't have to get to the point of litigation.
Right, exactly.
Kind of like Santa, right?
Yeah.
Since it's our last program in December, kind of like Santa, checking your list twice.
Right. For a happy holiday and a happy new year.
Absolutely. Well, I am so excited that we had the opportunity to discuss all of the things we went over. We went over patents, trademarks, contractual agreements, employment law. This is a great program, and I am so glad that we were able to offer it to all of our friends. We hope that you'll continue to share our programs, and please remember that Lisa, as well as all our wonderful attorneys, are here to help you, whether it's business planning, estate planning, immigration law, criminal defense, and starting January 2020, family law with the wonderful Autumn Fox. We're very excited to have Autumn join us.
Yes.
So we look forward to be working with you guys in the future. And so please continue to get involved with us, send us questions, and send us suggestions. Our next program, our next Winning Wednesday, is going to be Wednesday, January 8th. And we will be posting our January week-to-week program schedule very soon. So keep checking in, and thank you so much for being with us today, as you have been every other Wednesday for the last few months.
Absolutely.
Ciao.
We know you have choices in legal services, and it truly is an honor to be able to walk along you, your family, your business.
It is. We're grateful. Thank you guys, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays.